Hello, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and I want to thank all of our moderators, expert guests, and solution sponsors for participating in these Inside Jam panel discussions. This has been a big year of changes with the launch of the all-new, always-on InsideJam.com community site. For the past 4 years, everyone here at Solutions Review has been leaning in to build the Inside Jam into a celebration of enterprise technology, with best practices, expert analysis, and solution showcases. And we want all of you to join us there to keep the jam going into the new year and beyond. If you haven't joined Inside Jam, please do. And if you already have, take a moment to invite some of your colleagues. And again, thank you all for being here and enjoy today's discussion.
Solutions Review presents Inside Jam, a social media community for enterprise technology. Hello and welcome back to Inside Jam Live. My name is Jonathan Paula, and we have once again assembled a great panel for you as we continue our Data Protection Day. And that topic is best practices for governing cloud migration and compliance. We've assembled experts from around the globe to discuss, including our moderator, David Lotion. I'll let you kick off our introductions, David. 30 seconds or less. Tell the audience a bit about yourself and what excites you for today's topic.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks, Doug. I'm David Lotion. I'm the president of Knowledge Integrity, which is a company that focuses on data strategy consulting and guidance. I'm also a faculty member at the University of Maryland in College Park, and I love talking about information risk. And this is going to be a conversation that touches upon many aspects of information risk and how to mitigate that.
Hi, Balaji Ganesh. I'm excited to be here, and thanks for the opportunity. CEO, co-founder of Privacera. Privacera is in the business of data security governance. We help companies who have data in the cloud, in multi-cloud and hybrid cloud, and able to put guardrails on the data to able to meet privacy, security, or legal mandates, but also use that for a variety of purposes, whether it's digital analytics, ML, or even now coming up with generative AI. Brief background, started this company 7 years back. Second startup, my previous startup was in the big data security space, which was acquired by another big data company and converted to an open source project called Apache Ranger. A lot of the work we are doing is based on the work we have done with this open source community with Apache Ranger and Apache Atlas. So excited to be here. This topic of cloud is what we live in, and we're excited to talk about how we help companies balance between using data, but also putting guardrails on it.
Hello, thank you for putting this together. My name is Bassam Shaheen, a principal consultant with Instacluster, which is now part of NetApp. Since 1992, NetApp has taken the lead in harnessing ways to harness your data, as well as meeting the disruptive forces head-on for any security issues. Instacluster helps organizations move to the cloud onto SaaS platforms, focused on open source projects like Cassandra and Kafka.
Hi, I'm Kristen Demeranville. I'm the CEO and founder of Anson Sage. Anson Sage is a cybersecurity consulting firm that focuses directly on the food industry and some of the industries that surround it, such as water. The focus really is about bringing cybersecurity to food protection culture and how we can partner with them to make our food and our food supply chain as safe as possible. I'm also the host of Bytes and Bytes podcast, which is conversations between cybersecurity, IT, and the food industry. It doesn't just have to be food protection. It's also something to professors, HR, change management, things like that. And I'm really excited to be here because cloud is really important to the food industry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Roy Hassan. I'm the VP of Product and Marketing at a company called Absolver. Absolver is a data ingestion, data streaming solution for high-scale, high-complexity data. We've been around for a little while now, since 2018. Been helping a lot of different customers get data from a number of different data sources in a secure way into their warehouse, their data lake, and also their lake houses. One of the things that we've been working a lot with customers is securely migrating streams or workloads from on-prem environments into the cloud. So helping them sort of stagger the way that they migrate these data sets from the on-prem environment into cloud native platforms, helping them define what the security structure needs to look like and how do you actually identify and secure private data. Before Absolver, I was the product lead for AWS Lake Formation, which is a security data access, data security product for AWS. focus on securing data access in your data lake, and now expanded into securing data for Amazon Redshift as well. So very much interested in this topic. Been working with customers all over the globe to basically secure and detect data leakages. So it's a very interesting topic for me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Hi, my name is Subhaya Sundaram. I run products for Haiku, a company based in Boston. What we focus on, our entire objective is to keep the data safe. It doesn't matter where it is. What we do is the multi-cloud data protection. We allow customers to protect their data, be it in on-prem, in public, any of the major public clouds, Azure, AWS, Google, as well as all of your SaaS, because this is one thing a lot of people actually completely miss. People have data in over 200 different silos, and our goal is to keep the entire data safe and resilient, get it wherever you need it, when you need it.
Well, thanks all. As I kind of started out with a little bit of a premonition there about information risk, and I think that when we look at aspects of cloud migration, and all of you guys kind of gave a little bit of a different aspect of associated with the process of cloud migration, you see that it is laced with all sorts of different issues that may or may not impact the way an organization would consider the strategy of moving from their traditional on-premises platform architectures to cloud-based environments. So let's start out with a kind of a broad question. And I think, Balaji, I'm going to start with you. What do you see as the biggest issues associated with migrating to the cloud?
So most of our organizations have already migrated some part of the code, but the estate of data is so huge that many organizations are probably in early percentages of migrating that part of the cloud. And when migrating to the cloud, companies are really looking to see if they can really embrace best practices or revamp some of the practices. And that could be including how do you do operations, how do you do security, how do you do governance as part of it, because the practices that were built in the legacy part for the last few decades is not what companies want to carry forward into the cloud part of it. The cloud gives opportunities, I would say, to rehash some of those techniques, build best practices, clean up some of your internal processes and how you do it. But obviously the challenges part as part of doing that is it's not just the tech part, but also aligning your processes and people around that part. And that's where some companies have faced challenges is if you're not thinking ahead of those processes up front, especially let's take the topic of security and governance part of it. How do you going to implement rules around who can do what, whereas on-premise world would have been a very different way, cloud is slightly over as part of it. So I think there are process challenges this company needs to think about when migrating to the cloud.
Subhaya, why don't you share some of your thoughts on this
Absolutely.
as well?
Thanks, David. Similar to what Balaji said, right? I want to add to what he was saying. When he talks about a process, a big thing which I've seen a lot of customers run into is that they have to think of the people, right? It's the people, the process, and the tools and technologies, right? That's what the whole thing makes. One is the big thing is their understanding of the new cloud technology. I've seen so many customers saying, yes, let's go for it. They do it. And then they realize they got to rethink their people's skill set. That is one big part which they have to plan for. The other thing is that it's not the same set of, I want to elaborate on the process, same set of tools and technologies, what you applied before probably doesn't apply later, because otherwise, what is the benefit, right? Because cloud could be expensive if you don't use it properly. That's the other big thing. Customers have to think about the cost aspect of it, the tools, process, and the cost. Definitely.
So, Bassam, you guys are a service provider, I think, and have a lot of interactions with clients. Maybe you can share your client. What are your clients' experiences in terms of what are their biggest issues? And then, Roy, we're gonna get to you right after that.
Sure. Yeah. The main thing we see as a issue with migrating to the cloud is data sprawl. Across the organization, across the multiple layers, whether it's in the on-prem and the cloud. Actually, more recently, been dealing with more clients who are engaging in transfer data across the multiple cloud vendors, and to make sure that data that's in one cloud vendor is supposed to go to the other or not supposed to go to the other. But really, it starts with adoption in the business side. So you have to have a sponsor to make sure that the governance and security is paramount before you have your data sprawl to multiple locations, and to make sure that the data only goes to the place where it needs to go. This is from a storage point of view, from a transmission, from a classification of the data, the operations, management, multiple levels has to be engaged with the business, make sure they understand what is required before the actual migration.
Roy, you wanted to add something to that as well.
Yeah, I think overall the topic itself, like the you kind of have to think about what's the reason behind migrating to the cloud. Many times it's cost related, but I think a majority of times that companies migrate to the cloud is really to give them the ability to scale and innovate fast. Like Balaji and Subhaya said about the people and the processes, and it's not so much technology, it's about the company and getting everybody on board. That's extremely important. But I think there's another aspect there that what I've seen initially in many of my conversations around migration is people don't think about the scale aspect of what they're building. How do you scale the processes? How do you scale the technology? How do you scale the efforts that you put into this migration? And ultimately, when you get to the cloud, you want to be able to actually to hit the ground running, go fast, scale, add more users, add more use cases, deploy more capabilities. So the point about scale, in my opinion, is one of the biggest challenges that the companies tend to overlook, because they're hyper focused on how do we get the right tool, how do we get the right warehouse, or how do we get the right set of users to build the right process. Kind of get stuck in the weeds and you forget about ultimately you're in the cloud so you can run faster. So thinking ahead and thinking about how do you build this environment and your processes towards scale is something that I've seen a lot of companies kind of overlook and come to it later, 2 years down the road, and saying, oh my God, we should have done something different before.
Interestingly, what you're saying actually dovetails really nicely with what some of the other folks have already said, except it kind of brings it together in some way. I mean, Bassam, you were talking about sprawl. Subhaya, you were talking about some of the other aspects of management and operations and oversight. And a lot of these things are all, I would say, multiple sides of a multi-sided coin. In that you can't really think about one without thinking about the other. And Kristen, you've got a different kind of point of view on some of these aspects, especially because when I read through your bio, I got the impression that you're looking at this very, very strongly from a client perspective and from a use case perspective. So what are your thoughts in terms of some of the biggest issues in deploying to the cloud?
Sure. We already talked about it slightly in this, where I was talking about people and process is what I've really been more about. And that was already mentioned. So thank you for that. I had a conversation recently with a board member who was talking about scalability into being more digital in the food company they're in. It's a large food company. I won't mention the client. However, they didn't care about how they did it. They just needed to do it. So scalability was an issue, but the fact that they just wanted to do it fast and basically dirty was really frustrating to me, because that's going to open up, I'm sure all you agree, to massive cyber issues. It will be a massive issue for employees. They're going to miss data. They're probably going to fall out of compliance. We didn't even touch on GDPR or anything like that. So I think that people immediately just like, oh, it's and we're there, we're in the cloud. I don't think that's how it goes. And it scares me that board members are not educated enough to understand what moving to the cloud means and what that type of digital environment is going to look like for their employees. And also for an industry that has such a major global health impact, that scares me. And again, this is why my company is here. But these are the kind of things that have to be done a little bit different, a little bit more of a fine tune than if it was just a simple enterprise type upgrade. And I'm not saying that's easy either. I'm just saying it's a different beast altogether.
No, for sure. And I think that what you were just saying kind of ties a lot of it together. Cloud migration actually encompasses a number of different initiatives, including moving from existing data platforms that are either on premises or hosted in some other location, instituting data ingestion and processing pipelines differently than the way they traditionally done, maybe connecting existing data user applications to these migrated platforms in new ways. And all of this can be very complex. And this complexity actually adds, I would say, a lot of anxiety, at least in the experiences that I've had with some of our own clients, So less from a operational perspective, more from a assurance perspective. How do you verify that this cloud environment that you're going to is actually consistent with the systems that you are actually migrating from? Let's go to Roy. Why don't you start this one?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. In my experience, I've typically been focused on sort of the technical aspect of migrating data systems, migrating data processes and things like that. And what the customers or companies I worked with traditionally have done is basically just maintain two environments, right? You have your on-prem environment using its its own tools, doing the day-to-day stuff. And then you have the cloud environment where you start migrating the data, you migrate some of the processes, you start to migrate some of the workloads. And as you do that, you basically let it soak, you sit around and you kind of monitor, right? You make sure that it's working. And then slowly you migrate some of your users to it, right? And you let the users smoke test, right? To go through the system, everything look okay? Does it feel okay? Do you notice any issues here? Because catching, data gaps or problem with the data, it's actually really, really hard. You can run tests against it, but you're not going to see it until your users get on the system and look at it in many different ways. And then you're going to start realizing really what's going on. So I think there's a period of time that you're going to run two systems, your on-prem traditional systems and your cloud system, and you're going to keep monitoring and slowly, migrate users off of the on-prem environment. And once you get people off the on-prem environment, you can start turning things off and fully switch to the cloud. But it's a process. It takes a long time.
Balaji, I think you guys have the system that you guys have put together actually provides some mechanisms for ultimately for being able to institute some degree of monitoring within an environment. Do you guys have a perspective on how to assure that consistency in that cloud migration? And Subbiah, we're going to get to you next.
Yeah, so if the question was to me, so then the way we are obviously focused on is more on what we call as governance and security part of it, and maintaining consistency with all the rules and policies that has been built in the on-premise world. When you're migrating data, you're migrating users, but you're also migrating a lot of the existing processes, including security processes, in the cloud part. So as Roy mentioned, when you move that, most companies have done this in parts. They move the data, test it out, and then migrate the users. But once you start migrating users, you have to really put all those guardrails again in place, but do this in an incremental way and testing it out. But a lot of our customers have taken a fresh approach of they had a lot of redundancies and duplicates and other parts that these are over 2 decades worth of work going in. Cloud gives you a fresh perspective to say, I want to build it from scratch. So in many ways, companies have really come back and say, take this time to go and build some fresh processes into it. But ultimately, you want to really look at data, you want to look at users, you want to look at all the rules and policies, governance, and see if that maps into your existing posture that you have on premise.
Subbiah, you were going to add to what Roy and hopefully what Balaji just said.
Absolutely. I think both of them alluded to it. I think the way I'm a big believer in this crawl, walk, run philosophy. Sounds very silly, but that's a very, very important thing for customers. Because a lot of people try to chew a lot of things at the same time. It's better to choose some low risk items first, start with that, test it out, make sure it's okay, get through the initial process, and then get to a little more chunky before going to the tier one. Because some people say, let's take the big thing and move. It's like, guys, let's be pragmatic about it, because it's a risk fact, managing the risk too for the organization, right? So that's a big part which we say. And it's almost even one step earlier. Assess your entire infrastructure, choose what you want to do one step at a time, make sure it's there. And even when you talk about some of the applications, test it out, bring in your initial beta users or your early adopters, test them who are open to it, and then open it up much more. It sounds very basic, but it is sometimes I see so many times people miss that thing and they want to do everything all in one shot. It's a hard problem.
No, you're absolutely right. I think you're reinforcing what both of those folks had said. Yeah. Bassam, did you want to add something as well?
Yeah, I think prior to the migration, doing a good assessment of what you have and what options you have to make sure the data is consistent. This can be done at the storage level, where as you replicate the data to the cloud, you are able to make sure the data is replicated correctly. Or you have already adopted to adopt the technology that you'll be using that has built-in resilience and data comparison. So these are open source products. I talked about Cassandra. You can have it deployed in multiple AZs in the cloud, multiple regions, and even across multiple cloud vendors. So it has mechanism to confirm that the data is in sync before releasing up to the consumers or the users that are now in the cloud. And as Basil mentioned, and also Roy, is that you have them tested in the cloud in parallel until you are ready to move all the customers and clients over to the cloud.
Kristen, let me give you a chance to respond. If again, I think you've got an interesting perspective that balances what some of these other folks are going to say.
Yeah, it's funny, as you're all talking, I was having like flashbacks of things that have happened when I've watched migrations, and I was thinking about bringing an ERP system up to the cloud, about a decade ago, when it was sort of just starting to be that way, and how the company didn't phase it out properly. They said they had phases, but they didn't. And this was a bakery ingredients company, so obviously this was important to, again, public health. And I remember they turned all the factories on at once, and it was chaos. And I remember thinking, who decided this? Who did not talk to the right people here? There's no way we were ready, because they decided to do customization of the ERP before they released it out of the box. And as we know, you got to go out of box first before you put all the customizations in. And that's why you have the test environment that Roy was talking about as well, so the users can go in and bash it. And it was just really interesting, because ultimately that company almost bankrupt because of that awful ERP system. And now it's taught in collegiate environments of what not to do in cloud. So you were just making me have those memories of, we have to be careful when we're doing the migrations to really have a great planning before. And you've all alluded to that. And it goes back to, how do the users use the data? And how do they use it daily? Do they use it quarterly? And all these things. And also, I think we should talk about the fact that we need to do a data audit. Where are our crown jewels? What's the most important bits? If they don't know that, we have to deal with that shame up front. Like, let's just get past that and figure out what we need to do this. Because if we find out there's critical data after the fact, boom, we're done. Like, it's a mess. And I've seen it. I'm sure all of you have as well.
So let me drill down into that a little bit, because I think you're raising some interesting points, and ones that often organizations who are kind of enthusiastic about migrating to a new technology never seem to understand, which is you've got to check to see what you're doing and why you want to do it first. So what, Kristen, I'll go back to you. What are your suggestions? Let's say you were in that situation again with that same company, except that you could rewind and start from scratch. What would you do differently, or what would you suggest that they do differently today than what they did? And how has that shaped your thoughts about cloud migration?
Sure. I think that they needed to bring in a proper third party that was completely indifferent to the company, meaning they shouldn't have just run it with their own. I think that they should have spent probably a year and a half longer than they did planning. And I think that they needed to not turn everything on at once. I think that they needed to do it in stages, and also look at how their factories run, because you can't work in isolation. It's not the same. Industrial environments are not the same as enterprise. I think that's we all know that. And to do it the same way you did as an enterprise, without the foresight and the predetermination of thought, and to moving into a cloud with industrial equipment and what is important and what is not. I mean, they found things like printers that only came up once a quarter, but are the most important to production. How would you know that? You'd have to talk to someone who was there for 40 years. So there was a lot of missing gaps. So I think proper auditing should have been done up front, and that would have been the better way to start that project. Also, to listening to people who were on the ground for 40 years and explaining to them and finding out how their process works. It goes back to people process. We just talked about that a bit ago. If we go back to the people process, the data is going to start to make more sense because we understand how it's used. And I think ultimately that's what I would have suggested at the beginning of it.
So Roy, let's go to you. What kind of thoughts do you have about this?
Yeah, I mean, Kristen started this whole conversation with answering the first question around speed, right? People want to come in and just say, like, snap a finger and it's done. And I think when we talk about migrations, that's the one thing you don't want to do. Like, even though the board and your executive suite is pushing you to go as fast as you can't do that, right? Because there's a lot of problems that you can create down the road that you're just not aware of. So I think, focusing on what the objective is, what do you want to do? So basically breaking down your problem of cloud migration into what exactly are you migrating, right? Are you migrating a data warehouse that has some BI and some other applications on top of it? Are you migrating some, IoT processes where you're collecting data from a manufacturing floor and then you're acting on it? Like, what is it that you want to migrate first? And like Kristen said, like, go talk to the people who are running it day to day. Get the tribal knowledge out as much as you can, and then come up with a process that says, like, regardless of the time, right, we want to try to squeeze the time as much as possible, but let's think about it without the constraints of time, and figure out what are the things that we need to do. What can we eliminate? What can we redesign? What can we just migrate as is? And then come up with a process that you can check these boxes and start moving these pieces to the cloud one at a time, and then validating and verifying that these things are happening. Once you have that and you have that process in place, then you can start squeezing the time and say, can I get this done faster? Right. But it's really important to make sure that there's a flow and there's a process, because otherwise you get stuck in this cycle of, I just want to move quick and I want to do things as quickly as possible. And what I've seen companies do is actually depend on, and I'm going to put us here at not at fault, but a little bit kind of in the middle of it. Like, they go to vendors and they said, what can you do for me to move to get this done quickly? Can I just go buy Snowflake and just forget about all this other stuff and just do it in Snowflake, for example? Sorry to pick on them, but they kind of tend to go to vendors and say, how can you help me move faster? But the vendor is only thinking from their own perspective, right, within their little box. And they may not even know about all the other pieces that come with it. And that's really dangerous. And I've seen many companies fail in these environments where you end up with just leaking data. You end up with, private sensitive information just completely being accessible to anybody in the organization. We'll deal with that later. Like, you can't deal with that later. So, there's things like that where speed ends up hurting you.
So, Roy, you mentioned some things about a little bit about data protection and data security, and Kristen, I suspect that also is one of the experiences that you guys have seen, and I want to drill down into that a little bit more as well, because cloud service providers have been pretty diligent. I think at the beginning of the cloud evolution or revolution, you might say, there were some suspicions about cloud security. And I think they've been pretty diligent in hardening their environments against data breaches. But there are organizations that remain gun shy when they're thinking about moving, data or a system or some kind of combination to the cloud. So what are some ways, and Balaji, we'll go to you first, to alleviate their concerns about data security?
Yeah, so I think great question. So I think there's been a lot of concerns. And I think if you look at just the amount of budgets each of the cloud providers are spending, these are in multiple hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in cybersecurity. And it far expands what any normal organizations would spend on security. So it's a question between, do you rely on your own skill set running your own data center, or do you can go into a cloud? In many cases, I would argue that cloud infrastructure provides that ability, more probably better security on the infrastructure side. But that said, organizations have to really think about this dual responsibility in the cloud, right? So cloud doesn't mean if you go to AWS or Google that your security responsibilities are done. There's always a dual responsibility. Cloud is responsible for securing the cloud infrastructure, their data centers, and so it doesn't get breached. Customers are responsible for their data, and rules and policies and governance and security are on that part. So companies do need to invest in making sure their data, their own customer data, they're putting in the cloud. They put guardrails on it, they put governance on it, they put security on it. And this is something that sometimes gets missed in the cloud migration, is cloud denotes hands-off approach. You really need to think about in that shared responsibility. It's available from the cloud providers as well. So what will cloud providers provide? What will be the customer responsibilities? Customers are to really think about and plan for their own responsibility as well.
So, Bassam, let's go to you on that question because I think, again, you've got a certain perspective that can kind of reflect on experiences of those types of migrations and those types of challenges.
I agree with Balaji in terms of it is a dual responsibility for the cloud providers as well as our customers. So while providers do give secure systems, it is up to the customer and us to configure the security to the requirements of the business. So it's a hand-in-hand. We can make things open and accessible when we shouldn't. Migrating to the cloud, in our case, we provide a SaaS service. So to make customer more comfortable, we have different PCI compliance, SOC 2 compliance, making sure from a security point of view, their data will be secure, that it's encrypted. And so we go through due diligence on systems that we help migrate. And as part of the consulting arm, we also review any applications that require additional hardening. So it is a collaborative in this case. Us being involved is a three-way, not just the client and the cloud provider. And also to add on to that is the adoption of, I think earlier the question was hesitation about moving to the cloud. The cloud's been on for a while. We have, I worked at Intuit for many years and they adopted the cloud from beginning. So, people concerned about data security are still moving to the cloud and are comfortable with it. So going back to the customers and working with them, one, to have a plan of how to make sure that at every step, we are providing security from the transmission of the data from the client to the cloud, into our systems and into our databases, making access to them, to the applications within the cloud is to the right data, not access to data that one should have access to. So it's critical that it is reviewed by the customer as well as the vendors.
So the two of you are kind of focusing on balancing or actually doing a distinction between the responsibility of the platform provider, so that's the cloud service provider, the software provider, which is I'll call it middleware for now, just for lack of a better term, and then the customer's responsibility for managing their policies. And I think that actually is a complex boundary to navigate. And Roy, I think you had some additional comments to add on to that.
Yeah, so this is the topic that when I was at AWS working on Lake Formation, this came up often, right? Because like AWS stand is, shared responsibility model. AWS provides the underlying compute and the infrastructure and some security building blocks, and it's up to you to turn them on. But the topic really comes into like I'm as an end user, like I want to build my applications, I want to deliver my services to my users and my consumers. Yes, I get building blocks from AWS or from other cloud providers, but those cloud providers are the experts. They know, they see thousands of customers' configurations, and they experience all of these problems on their own and for the sake of their customers. So my point of view on that is that, yes, you get the ability to turn on encryption for your data, but the cloud provider should by default turn it on for you. They should set it to the most highest secure encryption algorithm that's possible for the right performance criteria that you need. Right, with regards to user access, when I'm adding a new user to, let's say, Redshift, there should be a default configuration that the user doesn't automatically get access to everything. Right? Maybe they get access to nothing first, and then you have to add it. Right? So initially, these tools are like, well, but I gave you the ability to configure access to your users. You just never did. So then your user got access to all the private information. I don't think that's good enough. Right? As we move into the future, as we want to make migration easier and faster, as I said before, it's dangerous. Speed is dangerous, but the cloud providers can help that. They can actually make it much easier, and not just cloud providers, us as vendors as well. Right? If I look at what we've done with Absolver, like we built all the best practices into the product. So when a user turns on and builds a pipeline to move data from some Postgres into Snowflake, for example, we make sure that it's secure. We make sure that all the best practices apply. There's encryption in place. We don't automatically open it up to everybody to go look at it. The user needs to go and say, okay, it's there, but who's going to have access to it, right? So I think that's important. You definitely see AWS doing more and more of that, which is really awesome. And I think, for the industry, we have to keep thinking about it, because we see all these configurations. We see how people use our products. We should be able to put best practices in place and default configuration that are secure automatically, and not waiting for the user to do it. And then we're going to hopefully avoid a lot less data leakage and exfiltrations and all these other problems.
So I think you're bringing up a really, really good point, which is that the cloud service providers, I think they believe that they've provided all the right tools to enable customers or cloud users to be able to establish the type of policy compliance that the users want to be able to deploy. But I think there's a level of complexity in figuring out how to make use of what the tools that the cloud service providers have provided, because they're driven by development and deployment of services, and less so in terms of understanding how their customer base is using them. So I think you've made a really good point. And Kristen, I think you've got some feedback as well on this topic.
Yeah, I was thinking about my days working for a large electronics company and how they had multiple operating companies, and cloud was really complicated because obviously they had to do it by operating company and then the over global portion. I had the privilege of writing the first cloud policy, and it was very daunting and difficult because you had to grab from different compliances from different parts of the world and then have everybody agree to it, and the lawyers ripped it apart and privacy ripped it apart, and then you just had this like skeleton thing come down. And it was frustrating because how do you have proper security when you can't even agree what security looks like? How can you have proper security for your SOCs to understand how to guard against cloud or to work with it if they don't even understand what that looks like based on operating companies' different varieties, whether it's a gaming or a music or a movie? How do you do that? This is where it becomes the real world complications of, I appreciate what the cloud providers are doing. I appreciate what all of you are doing as vendors, but as a client consuming it, that's really hard. And especially when the skill sets are not being taught properly, whether it's an employer or coming up through different certifications in a real world context. I just had a guest on my podcast recently say, you can't learn how to drive from YouTube. And it made me think that it's the same thing with security and IT. You can't really do it unless you learn how to do it in a practical sense. So it made me wonder, how do we stay resilient in the cloud, and how are we going to continue dealing with these challenges with data security if we can't even really understand what's going on with it in the first place in a way that's going to be fast to deal with issues, prevent data leaks? And then what happens when we have a data leak? How do we stay resilient through that? There's all these things around it. So thank you. You're all making me think a lot. I was like, oh goodness, how do we provide this for our clients if we ourselves are still going, yeah, we're going to just have to figure it out on the fly. But I feel like if you spent any time in IT in your career, that's how we learned anyways, because we're high adapters. But the clients aren't high adapters. They're just here to do their job and they want to go home. They're not here thinking about what happens if this password gets leaked and I have too much of this information on my computer, and I can see the CEO's schedule and I see the latest R&D that's being built in a factory via camera that I shouldn't be staring at on my couch. Those kind of things. Yeah, it's really concerning.
David, I just want to add one thing to what Kristen Roy were talking about, right? The first thing for me is that whatever technologies customers choose, right, partly there are two different dimensions to it. One is simplicity actually eliminates some of the challenges. The more knobs there are, the more problems people run into. So the simplicity is something should be baked in. When I say simplicity, it's intelligent simplicity, because it has to be smart. If you expect end users to know every 10,000 different configurations, mistakes are going to happen. That's the first part. The second part is that with more and more things becoming SaaS and more things becoming what we call the cloud, quote unquote, I think we have enough data sets using, everybody talks about AI technology today, it should be on Gen AI and everything like that. So using AI, we can do a lot more to help reduce some of these problems for customers as vendors. So I think that is something which we are very happy, which we keep incorporating more and more into what I'm sure everybody's doing it.
So you raise a topic that I'm gonna try to cycle around to, but Kristen, you used the word resilient and resilience a number of times, and it makes me think that we should shift gears a little bit from talking about the mechanics of migration to just talking about resilience in general. And Subhaya, I wanna go to you first on this one. Traditional on-premises systems, their implementations typically benefit from what I would say decades or scores of years of best practices for backup and disaster recovery and resilience in general. So, what are some best practices for instituting these types of resilience activities and positioning in the cloud?
Great question, David, because one of the things what happens is a lot of customers in the on-prem world, to your point, for many, many years, tens of years, they've always done the backup. There is a team, dedicated focus, everything is great. Once they go to the cloud, half the time, magically, they think it's all protected, which is, you guys all talked about the shared responsibility models. People have to realize there is a shared responsibility model. That's number one. Number two, I always remind sometimes customers, guys, we're all humans at the end of the day. We make mistakes. That's what happens. The second thing is there are things, ransomware attacks. You hear every day. I mean, sometimes it's mind-boggling the amount of damage it creates. You guys remember the most recent MGM attack, the entire business being shut down for 2 weeks. Imagine the impact it creates, right? Tremendous thing. So people have to look at the data protection when they go to the cloud. The responsibility doesn't go. But one thing customers have to do there is to rethink. It gives them an opportunity to rethink what they do for data protection when they go to the cloud. Rather than trying to do everything what you did on-prem, if you repeat on the public cloud, then as Roy said, what's the agility? I mean, the whole reason you want to go to cloud is for the speed. If you bring in the same processes, same slowness, it's going to this one. So people should look at what's built for the cloud, look at how they can leverage the power of the cloud. That is something I think where it happens is that don't try to retrofit what you have. Think of what you can do better in the cloud. So that is something I would strongly encourage customers to do that. The last point I'll mention, I'll probably let others talk to. The key thing here, there are two different things which I want to mention there. One is people think in cloud, once they are in one cloud, let's say they're in US East, one region, or US West, the one region. As much as clouds are highly available, they do go down. I mean, like there are times where the thing is down for a day, whatever happens, bad things happen. You have to have disaster recovery within the cloud too, within the same cloud. Don't even worry about it. Just being able to do within the cloud, you have to have built in. That's there. The last one there is we talk about cloud generically, but there are a lot of people even going to SaaS. SaaS is a huge thing. I mean, I don't know how many of you guys probably know that. Do you guys remember the average number of SaaS in a company? It was originally, when I heard it was a mind-boggling number. It's 217 is the average number of SaaS in a company. Even as a young company like us, initially we thought, that must be a wrong number. We did a quick check. We had 75 registered ones, even as a young company like us. So it's like, wow, okay, this is a problem, and customers have to protect the data even in a SaaS, and that is something people have to think of.
So, Roy, your company does a lot with data pipelines and data ingestion, and what Sabai is referring to, I think, points to a more general issue about resilience, which is not every organization is going to be committed to a single region and a single cloud service provider, but rather will have a hybrid environment that is going to a number of different cloud environments, and also wants to have some degree of flexibility or agility to be able to jump from one platform to another. So, do you have some thoughts about how to remain resilient in the long term in terms of managing the organization's enterprise data pipeline architecture?
Yeah. I mean, I'll start by saying that I agree 100% with what Sabai and everybody was saying about resiliency. The reality is that cloud AZs and regions don't actually go down that often, right? The reality is that yes, there's a lot of cyber attacks, but companies do have some backups. Companies do have solutions. I think the cybersecurity part is a little bit more, or the exfiltration of data, or what happened to MGM and all these other things. Like I think that's becoming more of a problem. Going back to my previous point where I said cloud vendors and us as vendors, we need to build these tools in place already so users can start using them without having to think about, do I need to turn on backup? Like backup should just be on, right? I should be able to have backup automatically on my database, and then that backup gets replicated to S3, to another region. So I have that resiliency in place. The tools are there. They're not automatically owned by default because obviously there's costs associated with it. But I think as we advance more and more with our technology, these things are just going to become default because the cost is going to keep going down. Like the cost of S3 and archiving and moving data from region to region keeps going down. So it's easier to turn on these features automatically. I think from a data pipeline perspective, like what we've seen from customers is that they, at this point, they don't all live in one environment. Like Google is really good for Google Analytics, for example, right? People always use it for that. They may run application servers on Google and the data gets stored locally, but they want to do analytics in AWS. They want to do machine learning in AWS. So they have data sets scattered across different places, but they're able to sort of use Absolver, and even Apache Kafka is a great way to sort of orchestrate data streams coming from different places and actually build some resiliency around it to say that if I'm bringing data from Google to a specific region in AWS to do analytics and for BI, for example, if that region goes down, my stream inside of Absolver can automatically flip to a different region and start sending data over to the other region, right? Some companies in more regulated environment actually duplicate the streams, right? It's the same stream of data coming from a particular source, and they're just sending it to two different environments, two different regions. Call it, hot, or sometimes it's, master and the standby environment. And then those different configurations, depending on, how much time you're okay or losing, or how much data potentially could be lost due to an outage. But there's a different patterns to implement this. And kind of going back to what we said in the beginning, speed and moving fast is a killer, right? You're going to run into problems if you don't think about these issues, because many times people are like, well, how do I get my users to query their data? But they don't think about what happened if their region goes down. Granted, it doesn't go down that often. Very rarely does it go down. But if it does happen, what are you going to do then, right? And then usually that happens, and then they go, oh my God, I didn't architect this correctly, and then they start running around and trying to figure out how to do it.
So you guys are raising, a number of pretty critical points, and I want to, refer back to something that's come up a couple of times in terms of the future, and something that is on top of mind these days. We were just talking a lot about cybersecurity and what I would refer to as cybersecurity diligence in a number of different perspectives. And before we were talking about, or there was a number of different comments associated with generative AI or AI and machine learning, and there's different opinions about whether generative AI poses risks to these environments as opposed to contributes to the ability to prevent any types of vulnerabilities and to mitigate those risks. So I'm going to kind of combine those two topics and say, well, how can we, where do you see, these newer technologies like generative AI contributing or impacting to cloud strategy in general, and establishing controls for, I'll say cybersecurity, but I'll also bundle compliance in there as well. And let me jump to Balaji to start that last. I think this is going to be our last.
So I think exciting topic about generative AI is, again, I take as another example where it's a huge innovation happening and presents challenges for security, but also opportunities. I'll answer this in twofold, and some of the things that we are doing, as well as there's aspect of generative AI being all parts of the organization, just like SaaS or other pieces, it very presents risk. So companies are really thinking about how to put guardrails on what is going in and out of those generative AI. This is something we're really focused on as well. But there's also a huge opportunity of generative AI being able to make sense of a lot of data that security has from logs and data point of view, to really, really crystallize and seeing what's happening, because there is a huge data sprawl. There's a huge amount of sprawl happening of code in the cloud. It's very hard for security teams to solve with people. So generative AI is going to help security teams analyze risk faster. So I see this as an opportunity, but it's also something very quickly becoming a risk for many companies on the sprawl that is going to happen with generative AI models. And companies have to think on both fronts.
Kristen, let's go to you, and then we'll go to Bassam.
I think companies have to really take a hard look at why they want these tools to be added into their environment. AI and beyond, IoT. I think it's great that we all want the fun new gadgets, right? I'm sure we're all surrounded by several of them right now in our own homes. But for a business, do they really need them? I think to farming really fast. In order for a small to mid-sized farm to be able to maintain the ability to grow yields, they're going to need help from AI and robots. It helps with the labor workforce. They don't have to bring in people from other countries because, as an example, the US doesn't want to work in farms. And that will be really helpful for those particular industries. But do we really need it in other places in food production, let's say? Do you really need to have, I don't know, some particular fire suppression that's on IoT? Is that really something you need to monitor? If it is, great. If it isn't, why do you need it? I think they need to have these tough conversations rather than we want the cool new stuff and be able to say we're the innovating company. That's great. You can innovate later, or you can innovate in slow ways, not like the whole fast, let's go. It's the crawl and walk to run scenario, as we've already said.
Bassam, why don't you share some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think one area to focus on with generative AI is great tool. Fun, as Kristen mentioned, it's fun toy. It can be dangerous. I think this is where data governance comes in importantly, is to make sure that data is classified as generative AI is going through the data set, make sure to avoid certain. So for looking at your knowledge base, there's some things that can be gleaned for answering questions for customers. So we don't want to grab data that is sensitive. Something to look into. From a general security, I think there are a few steps that to consider. Is we need to be more open in terms of when things occur. If we see that the AI or any other system that's grabbing information is not supposed to, not to hide it and try to fix it, to share it across the company and across other organizations where we see this issue. Also making sure that there's a cybersecurity review board, for example, that sees all these incidents and keeps track of them and resolves them to make sure they don't happen again. There are several steps, but I don't want to be long-winded on this, but several steps to make sure the data is secure and make sure that everyone knows what the resolution is.
Subaya, you brought up both of those topics, both cybersecurity and generative AI. So I am confident that you've got an opinion on this as well.
Absolutely. So to what you said, David, I mean, the way I think is that every organization, there is risk, but you have to adopt it. It's almost like right now, it's one of those things. If you don't adopt it, you're going to be left behind. It's a must-have. It's not a nice-to-have anymore. That's one of the reasons I think we talk about cloud here. That is an area, it's a playground. The way I think of this is a playground. This is a constant. The problem with this thing is that it's going to change. By the time you implement it, a month, 2 months later, it's going to change. Again, it's going to change. It's going to change. What technology allows? What is a place which allows us to do something like that? Cloud is a great place to experiment, try new, because it's evolving so fast. And the cloud vendors are leading it. And we got to leverage as many tools as possible to keep the customers at the highest level possible, efficiency possible. And I think it's a must-have. Across our technologies, the way I think of it is that we got to improve. It allows us to improve the operational efficiency. It allows the provisioning efficiency for the customer, the entire process. And the last thing is that entire ecosystem efficiency. This, at the end of the day, it all goes back to what's helping the customer business bottom line, right? And AI is something we have to do. It's going to become a must-have for all.
Yeah.
So Roy, let's get you to wrap up the discussion here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with everybody. I think everybody said kind of like what we're all thinking. I think generally speaking, right, the AI is out of the lamp. Like, you're not going to put that genie back in. Honestly, today we're just scratching the surface. It's where the internet was in the early 60s. We're just kind of figuring out what it is. I think everybody's gotten really, really excited about what the potential is. And we're starting to explore that. And I think in the next few years, we're going to see a lot more AI getting embedded in everything that we do in all of our tools. I think the biggest problem with AI, if you compare it to other technologies to sort of change our lives, is that it's a black box, right? When the internet came, okay, cool. Like, I can kind of see and understand what's going on with an AI model. I have no idea, right? Unless you're a data scientist or, an engineer who can unpack it and really understand it. Like, it's really, really hard to understand what's going on. So I think transparency is going to be huge, depending on people reviewing it and panels and humans doing the work. I don't think it's scalable, sustainable, whether we want it or not. People are going to have Gen AI embedded in everything, and we won't be able to approve all those tools, just like we tried to do back in the 90s with software being added to an enterprise needs to be approved by security and other folks. Eventually, they just gave up, right? And I think it's going to happen now too with Gen AI. It's going to be embedded in so much that you just can't physically evaluate everything. And it's really about us vendors and the Gen AI vendors and all these companies really being open about what they're doing and adding transparency capabilities to their models. I'm looking at OpenAI. I'm looking at Cohere and AWS and all these companies who are building these massive models. Give me a window. Give me a window into what you're doing and what the model is doing. Give me tools to audit and to be able to extract things and say, like, I want to exclude that piece of content, or I want to attribute that piece of content to something. I think we need to spend a lot of time on building those type of transparency and auditing capabilities into these models, because we're not going to stop the adoption.
Well said, one and all. Really appreciate your time and expertise today. I wanted to come back in at the end of the show here and invite each of you to do some quick self-promo. And I do want to stress quick, 15 seconds or so. We'll start with Balaji and go around clockwise and end with David. Where would you like to send the audience, whether you want to promote a blog, a book, your solution, a podcast, or your personal LinkedIn profile? Choice is yours, Balaji.
Absolutely. So you can find more information about us at www.privacera.com. And obviously, you can find me on LinkedIn. So follow me, but also do look at our website for it.
Excellent. Thank you for keeping it quick. Bassam.
Sure. You can find us at instacluster.com or NetApp for anti-malware storage to open source data solutions. You can reach out.
Super. Appreciate it. Kristen.
You can find me on LinkedIn, of course. Please connect. It's usually the easiest. My website is anzensage.com. And obviously the Bytes and Bytes podcast. It's bytes like you bite something and bytes like computer bytes podcast. So please come join us there. It's a great conversation.
Thank you. Roy.
I'm signing up, Kristen. I'll be there. So Absolver.com. Come visit us. Check out the website. Check out the product. If you have any question, you can always click on book a demo. It's actually going to me. It's going to some of our solution architects. So I'd love to have a conversation with you. And of course, on LinkedIn, Roy Hassan is my name there if you want to connect or just follow. I talk about a lot of different things, product. I talk about streaming data, data quality, lots of data related stuff, and can get pretty technical. So if you want to enjoy that, please follow.
Excellent. Subhaya.
Thank you very much. For folks who actually, as I mentioned earlier, people have on average have at least 217 different data sources at a minimum in a company. When you have so many, it's very hard to know even what you actually have. We have a free tool called rgraph. All you have to do is it's just hycu.com, HYCU, hycu.com/R letter R graph, regular graph. rgraph, check it out, and it's a free service. Try it out, and that will give you an entire landscape, your data landscape in your organization.
Thank you. And last but not least, our moderator, David.
So I want to thank everybody on the panel for their great insights today. It was really good having this conversation. If you are interested in following me, I certainly welcome you to come to the Insight Jam site. I am providing articles and conversations at that site. I also welcome all the folks to reach out to me via LinkedIn. I am very actively monitoring that channel, so I look forward to hearing from you.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, everyone, for your time and expertise. And for our audience, if you came in late or missed any portion of this broadcast, we do encourage you to go back to the LinkedIn or YouTube Solutions Review channels and watch the replay whenever you'd like. And if you want to stay tuned to those exact same channels, we'll be back with our final panel of the 2023 Insight Jam: Security, Compliance, and Privacy for Data Teams and Platforms. Until then, though, thank you again for watching and listening. My name is John. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.